Welcome back to Unmatched. My guest today is Elfried Samba. I am so pleased to have him as a guest to the podcast. Elfried has a wealth of experience in building and managing strong brands that connect with audience on a deep level. And he's known not only for his expertise in digital marketing and social media, but he's also a truly engaging leader that speaks in support of diversity and inclusivity and strives to affect positive change in the world. All this and more is what makes Elfried truly unmatched. In this episode, he shares some of his valuable experience on how to leverage social media to create an engaged and loyal community. I'm excited for you to listen to him and to get to know him. Hey Elfried, welcome to the podcast today.
Yeah, great to see you again. I was really looking forward to this podcast.
So I'll jump right into it because, you and I have spoken a few times and we've gotten to share some more stories already. But I would like to start by asking you to share with us a little bit your journey and how you came to be, this person that is the social media person, for me at least, my number one social media person that I always look up to and go for tips for. How was that journey for you, getting into marketing and getting to do social media for a living?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I moved to the UK. I was born in the Congo. I moved to the UK when I was 14 years old. And all my life, I thought that I was going to be a doctor like my dad, because my dad's my hero. He's the person I look up to. And for the most part, that was what I thought, that's the path that I thought was written for me. And then I realized that I was shit at science, and that plays a fundamental part when it comes to actually becoming a doctor. And then I realized, okay, cool, I need to find something else to do, right? Now, what am I good at, and what are my references, and where can I get my inspiration? My mom is an entrepreneur. So that was a great, almost like example for me to go to. And I said, okay, cool. If I can't be a doctor, maybe I can be an entrepreneur, or maybe I can do something along that space, because we both love coming up with ideas. So I thought, could I get paid to come up with ideas and be creative? At the time, the answer was no. But I later found out that I was sitting on a gold mine, and the penny dropped in 2007 when Steve Jobs presented the iPhone for the first time. And just the way that it was done got me really, really excited about this thing called marketing. And I was like, that's what he's doing. He's storytelling really complex information in a way that people can understand it and love it and get excited about it. And I love that storytelling angle. And the whole almost like mention of, instead of using 1 gigabyte of music, him saying, you can have 1,000 songs in your pocket. I just love the visualization that's created from storytelling and how you communicate. So I got obsessed with marketing, and the fact that he wore black all the time, that's the reason why I still wear black with my own twist. I was like, okay, cool. It's not the stereotypical marketing, madmen in suits kind of like approach. And then shortly after, I heard about this 23-year-old called Mark Zuckerberg who said no to Yahoo for $1 billion because it was working on this thing called Facebook that me and my friends all used. And I was like, wow, that's really disruptive. That's exciting. And being a person that was studying marketing, we all know about the 4 Ps. And I was like, well, the place in the 4 Ps that we spend our time is online. So could we market on social platforms in the future? And it was a very like out there thought. And actually, most people told me that that can't be done, right? So I was so obsessed with the idea that it would actually became my dissertation thesis in 2012, how small to medium-sized businesses can utilize social to compete against their larger competitors, right? Because it'll even the playing field because it's free to use and you can make the most of the critical mass without paying what you used to pay before. And it was pretty much marked down due to lack of Harvard references because no one's actually ever challenged it. And my whole thing has been to become that reference. And I was very fortunate that Gymshark gave me the ability to do that. And now, following what we've done, it's important to continue to be that reference and to continue to push the barriers and showcase what can be done on the platforms that we have today. And obviously, being African, I love the whole ethos of community and bringing people together. So you take storytelling, you take creative thinking and the passion for bringing people together, community building, and that's what I identify as.
And how do you define community building? Because I have to be honest, sometimes I think about it and it almost sounds superficial in a way, right? When you think about, oh, let's build community. It's such a buzzword these days that it's like it's one of those boxes that you need to tick, right? Oh, of course we need to build community. But I think that there's a deeper level, and especially with new technology coming onto the arena everywhere in life, but also in marketing, all the way more, I think community is actually something that needs to play a huge role in any brand's positioning and strategy. So, talk to me a little bit about how you define community building from a marketeer's perspective, but also how you see that actually happening in real life.
Once people start to use the buzzword community, that's when I know that they don't know anything about community, right? Because for the most part, only brands think that way. Only marketing people think that way. Really, what you're trying to do is bring together people that have a shared interest in something. It may be something tangible, but really it's all psychological, right? They galvanize towards something that represents or tells the story of who they are. So when you take Gymshark, for example, the community doesn't belong to Gymshark. It belongs to fitness. And Gymshark is the brand that they feel represents how they see fitness. And that's what it's all about. And what I always tell people as a sound marketing strategy, it's not about marketing your business. It's about marketing the industry that you're in. And if you do it justice and you're authentic in the way that you do it, the people that are within it will recognize you as the leader of that community, right?
In other words, what you're saying, which I find super interesting, is almost like you don't create a community for the brand. You, as a brand, try to fit in that community
Exactly.
in a way, right? And respect it and value it in the right way.
Exactly. Effectively, how a brand builds community, or at least is recognized as the thought leader or the spokesperson for a community, is by demonstrating that they fundamentally understand the highs, the lows, the challenges, the language, the customs of a community. That's why memes work so well, right? Especially memes that highlight the pains of a community. What that does is it demonstrates that this person understands me, right? And that's why they're so powerful. It seems like it's almost like, for example, comedians. They talk about comedians being the best observers of culture. Their jokes are effectively them saying what we are afraid to say out loud by observing how we behave, right?
Actually, it's happening less and less, right? Even comedians these days are cutting back.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. But for the most part, you obviously have to be able to toe the line for what you want to be recognized for. But how I feel about brands and communities is I actually don't think that every brand needs a community, right? You can just be a commodity and somebody that connects with people because you have a product that they can't live without, or you're the most convenient, or you're the most cheapest. You can look to compete at that level, but the issue with that is it's very replicable, right? People can copy what you're doing, right? So you're always going to be competing on price. You're always going to be competing on convenience. The power about community is you're now competing on identity. And the issue with identity is when push comes to shove and a recession happens, or even when people are tight on money or whatever, like what's happening right now, people never want to lose sight of their identity. There will still be some things that they're not going to cut off their budget because it's a part of who they are and how they demonstrate themselves. I'll give you an example. Beyonce's performing, right? We're in the middle of a financial crisis, yet her tours, which is the most expensive tours, are all sold out. Why? Because it's part of the identity, part of the passion, and part of the connection that she has with her community, right? The beehives, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned Apple before. I guess Apple is a great example as well, right? The people that use the Apple ecosystem and products are very, very specific, and their identity is very clear, right? You are the type of person that will use an Apple phone or computer, and it means you're creative, and it's a status thing, right? Give me a couple of more examples that you think. I'm interested in the differentiation between brands that you think don't need to create a community versus brands that do have to build community around them.
Amazon, they don't need a community. right? They'll just out convenience everybody, right? If you're not genuinely trying to build a connection with people and committed to taking a step every day to add value to the community up front, then it's very, very difficult to adopt that as a strategy, right? But if done well, it'll pay you tenfold. So some of the brands that people recognize as the most loved, your Apples, your Gymsharks, you can even say like your Nikes, right? A lot of these brands, especially when you talk about footwear, right? Or any other brand. And even now, when you start to think about your Pumas as well, right? Everyone now is starting to make sure that when you wear that brand, there is a nod when somebody else is wearing the same brand, right? That is the signal that we are officially part of a community. We see the world the same way. As soon as you're a brand where when two people meet that have your brand, see each other, and they acknowledge that they're one and the same, that's a community, right? And it's not the brand that defines that they have one. It's the community and the people themselves that identify that that's a thing. So there's a brand called Cortez in the UK, which is just killing it right now. They are literally, they will drop a post on Instagram saying we're going to be in this location, and like 2,000 people will turn up and shut the whole place down. It's brands that think about their community first, attach themselves to an identity, and then just literally have like high retention, right? And then what happens there is you get word of mouth. So therefore you save on advertising because everybody's talking about you. Whereas there's some brands that are just there for transactional. I need you for this purpose. I don't need you to infiltrate my life any further, but you do this for me at a very high level and I can't live without you, right? They both achieve retention, but one is more transactional and one is more emotional.
And though you said it's not easy to build a community, and I know that for a fact as well. So let's address the elephant in the room. As marketeers, we know that there's always a question of budget, sales versus building awareness, and with that comes building the community. How hard is it to build community? And what does it take? What does a brand need to do in order to actually, what is the mindset there? What is the tension that you need to address in an organization, and how do you need to look at marketing and sales KPIs in order to be able to really build a community these days, especially these days, right? Because it's maybe a few years ago, maybe like 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago even, the social media landscape was very different. But today, we have BeReal, and we have Instagram, and we have Twitter, and we have LinkedIn, and we have, so many other things, and obviously Meta and so on. And so, like just the sheer fact of deciding where you want to be more visible. Of course, TikTok, let me not forget about, the biggest one. So many things to consider. And this all requires resources and budget and content creation and being on top of things. So tell me a little bit your perspective on this tension, that we all live as marketeers, as what is more important, sales, awareness, community.
Yeah, so the issue that I feel that is in marketing is that there's a little thing called KPIs, and there's a little thing called quarterly reviews, and there's another word called ROI. These are all words that we don't use in our everyday life, right? But when we put on our marketing hats and our business hats, we try to make sure that everything that we do, even though we know that it works, if it doesn't have a metric associated to it, then it hasn't happened, right? And fundamentally, founders and businesses that understand that they're playing the EQ game, and actually the most important metric is brand love, brand sentiment, brand engagement, brand recall. There's almost like two conversion funnels that you can focus on. There's the traditional one, which is upper funnel with brand awareness, and then it's consideration, and blah, blah, blah. You get to the bottom, it's conversion. That is one way to measure the effectiveness of marketing and the journey that people take. That's performance-based marketing, right? Now, on the other side is what I like to call like the true brand metrics. You start at the top, you look at impressions, and then you go to reach, because impressions and reach is two completely different things. One is how many people have seen, the other is how many individual people have actually seen it. And then you go into how many people have engaged, or I like to say how many people have given a shit about it. So, okay, they've seen it, now who actually cared? to engage and do something. And then you go one level down, which is sentiment. Now, was the engagement positive or was it negative? And then you go one level down, which is now what's the recall, right? So are you getting high impressions? You're getting high reach, you're getting people engaging with you in a positive way, and they remember that your brand was associated with that positive feeling. If you can get people that just focus on doing that, then the ones on the other conversion window will have an easy time. What great branding and marketing does is make it super easy for you to convert on the other side. And what's happening is people are trying to convert on first interaction. That just doesn't work, right? If you say that if I want to do this brand thing, I need to see X financial result off the back of that immediately, then there's just no point having a conversation. That's exactly what happens. You need to be able to have leadership or people that actually understand how the world works, and that marketing and branding is a game to take up front of mind at the time when somebody needs the service or product you provide, but also front of heart. Right? So when you're stuck between two potential options, what you identify with, going back to the whole conversation about when I go to a tech store and I need a new laptop and somebody tells me, here's this features for this PC that can do all these crazy stuff, but I'm like, oh, but I'm a Mac guy. That's not a rational decision. That's an emotional decision, right? So one is there, which is perfectly rational. Where is it? What's the price? What's the features? All that stuff. The other one is emotive, right? And front of mind. And those two have to work very, very closely together. However, what we try to do is, because it's cheaper and more efficient, we tie them as one in the same. And that's why it doesn't work.
I completely agree. And also it's sort of separating the product marketing from the brand marketing, right? I think that's a huge misconception. I love to hear your thoughts on it, because one is focused on selling the product. The other one is focusing on, I wouldn't say selling the brand, but building the brand. And it takes a long time to do that. And only time will tell if it works or if it doesn't, So to your point, if you connect the two, that's where the sort of the tension starts to come in, because KPIs don't really match.
Yeah, 100%. And a guy that I worked with called Sinai always used to tell me that it's not an or conversation, it's an and conversation, right? The best marketeers don't have all conversations. It's not you either do this or you do that. It's you do both. I'll give you an example. When I was at university, we did this entrepreneurial challenge because we're very practical. And what you had to do is raise the most money for a charity creatively, right? The key being that what you're rated on creatively is actually when you win the big trophy. What you do financially is a trophy, but then that's like second fiddle. We won the creative trophy. We just missed out on the financial trophy by £50. And I was livid, right? Because I'm an and guy. I'm like, I have to do both, right? So ultimately, what businesses have to do is be almost like infectious about how do we get both? How do we do both? How do we make sure that we have a team that's there to captivate their heart when one is captivating their brain? Because if you're an and brand, oh, I love it, it represents me and it makes sense, then you're like the winning hybrid, right? Whereas if you're one or the other, then you just make yourself more compromised, right? So I feel like if people want to be the top of the top, that's what Apple does. It's both. Right? The biggest brands in the world, the most loved brands in the world, when you do all those research for brands that Gen Z millennials love, they're the ones that do both, right? And I feel like you should be able to have separate KPIs, but that complement each other. So that, and you incentivize people on, basically Bill Belichick, who coached the Patriots. I tend to get a lot of my references from sports and music and other places outside of business, always talks about do your job. But by one person doing their job, which could be different to another person, it actually makes the other person's lives easier. And what happens is with our KPIs actually force the business to compete with each other. So I always used to say that if it's, let's say, for example, Gymshark versus Gymshark, you have no chance competing against everybody else in the world. It has to be complementary KPIs that are different and respect what both is trying to do, but then for the good of the long term of the business. And then you have a chance to fight everybody else. That's why startups are so good with it, is because everyone's like, we know what you're doing, we're doing it together, let's go. Whereas big businesses, it's, well, no, we need to talk to those guys over there. And then we'll need to speak to these ones over here. And then if we're aligned, and then they're spending too much time doing trying to win one over on each other on KPIs and metrics, that you're forgetting the importance in hand, which is the consumer, right? And every time you're taking time having those board meetings to get things along the lines, what's happening is somebody like a Gymshark or a Cortez or a somebody more nimble is just getting it done. And that's just the difference.
Yeah, cash is in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, two things. One, playing the long game, which I think it's so important to not look at this part of the brand building is not a short term gain, right? This is a long term. And the other thing is consistency. Because, if going back to Apple, which is also my favorite, absolutely my favorite example to, I always go to that one as well, is I remember the 1984 campaign and how progressive and how emotional and how evocative it was to what they wanted the positioning to be. And if you look at some of the very early speeches of Steve Jobs, he knew from the beginning how you wanted Apple to be positioned. And he knew, how this marketing game is. And, he was taking the cues from the biggest brands out there to really implement this playbook to Apple. So consistency and playing the long game, essentially, in my mind, are the two keys to success here, right? What do you think?
Yeah, but also now here's the challenge with Apple. By the way, my favorite company as well growing up. The issue is that they became exactly what that ad was actually against, right? So it's funny how that flips, right? And they become the new IBM, right? They're the biggest company in the world, right? And that's just how things happen, right? Another thing is because there's a generation of marketeers that were inspired by Apple and the whole concept of think different, actually what happened is that everybody started to think the same, right? Because they became the overall reference point for everybody, then everybody does it. And that's why the terminology is irony, right? Because actually it still applies this year, but people associate it so much with Apple that they forget that you're all thinking the same, you should do something completely different. So going back to your points, I think differentiation is super important, right? The 101 or marketing 101 or the definition of marketing from when I first went to university and I read the Jobber 2007 book, it said a marketeer or a marketing team aims to meet or exceed the needs of the consumer better than a competitor. That's what marketing is, right? So that means that value is another one, right? So, and you have to do that faster, better than anybody else that's trying to do it for the same audience, right? And then you add authenticity to that too, right? So now people don't just want you to do that, they also want you to know them because they don't buy what you sell, they buy what your product or how your product helps them tell the story about themselves, right? Because for the most part, because we're all stuck in our phones, and now whilst people can tweet or comment, they can't speak. So they now rely on products to do the speaking for them and to categorize and tell their story. That is the shift that's happening the further we're going into a digital age, which is why I'm even convinced that the value proposition for schools going forward shouldn't be IQ, but it should be EQ, because now people need to communicate, especially with ChatGPT coming along and people can, and it being able to write an essay for me. I won't have to sit down and write an essay anymore. I can find the answers. So the shortage we're going to get, not just for brands, but in education going forward, is about how do you connect emotionally with people and communicate. And that's what I think that marketing brands should be leaning on, and also the education system should be leaning on to.
Completely agree. And to your point, differentiation is such a big point to consider, right? Because there's so many products out there. I mean, Apple has a lot of competitors. Puma has a lot of competitors. Gymshark has a lot of competitors. Everyone has competitors. And the cool thing is that it's not even the big competitors that normally you should be worried about, but it's the up and coming smaller ones that are killing it, that have nothing to lose and have everything to gain and have creativity and no structures in place and no, like the sort of internal processes and so on to hold them back. So one thing that I'm very curious about to hear your opinion is this aspect of social listening, which helps, to sort of define your positioning in a better way, to engage with the consumer in a better way, to understand their pain points, and to build this community. How do you stay relevant? How do you stay authentic in this AI era where sort of everything is given to you on a silver platter, right? You don't need to do the research anymore. You don't need to speak to the people anymore one to one. You need to create a good prompt and you will get hopefully all the research digested for you and in small bites so you can actually use it for your brand. How do you see social listening, developing over the next few years?
I just feel that we're now about to shift from where people deem IQ as a true value proposition, and it's going to go to EQ, right? Because people are going to be very aware that they're probably speaking to a bot, or what you're saying is probably coming from AI, but then you still need to be able to demonstrate that you care and that you know. So actually, what I would do, right, if I was a CMO sitting in any business, I would say, okay, cool. And it started one step back, right? It started when everybody started doing emotive videos with pianos and a voiceover, trying to associate a product with something about life after Apple did it. And then people get desensitized to it. It's like you've seen it once. Okay, cool, that was great. Then everybody does it, and you're like, okay, cool, that's not valuable anymore. I don't trust it. Who's doing something different? What will happen is, eventually, when AI is doing all your tweets and people have seen the pattern, they're gonna want to see immersiveness. That's why people don't trust seeing a high-tech camera footage anymore. They're like, well, that's too polished. They know that there's a director and a media team and everything, and it's not authentic. That's why phone footages and memes and things that look unpolished do so well, because there's something that they can trust. And it actually is a better way of demonstrating that your brand truly authentically means what they're saying. And now with AI, that's just going to get people to be looking for bullshit, right? Now they're going to be saying, okay, cool, you say this, but what are you showing me? And again, it's going to be another challenge for brands, which is those that can demonstrate that they actually walk the walk and don't just talk the talk or write the write. Those are the ones that are going to be able to win. And that's where I think that people should focusing their marketing strategies.
And in all that, how much do you think we still need to keep the personal aspect of it? I mean, just to explain what I mean, I always think that marketing is a very, very personal thing. We fell in love with Apple, I'm pretty sure, both you and me, because of Steve Jobs, right? Because of his aura. If we look at the biggest brands, it's because there is someone visible there, right? That sort of inspires us. You have your, example, Gymshark with Ben Francis, we have Stephen Bartlett these days, and so many other examples, right? So you get attached to the person and then it becomes personal, right? You are part of that community because you follow that person. How do you see that evolving? Because that person has a very finite amount of time available, and then you get all this AI tools to support you in your content creation, and it all becomes a bit not as authentic or on the spur of the moment. There's already a strategy behind, let's put it this way. How does that evolve? How do we keep that engagement personal?
Well, you're going to have to stop hiding behind a laptop and start showcasing some FaceTime. Because at first, let's say, for example, like I post on LinkedIn, people could feel like they better understand a person through their copy and their text. Like we've communicated more via comment sections, and you already feel commonality. Now, when AI comes along, people want to make sure they're speaking to a real person. If anything, I feel like the more that the world gets digitized, kind of like fashion, you go backwards, right? Where people will seek authenticity will be based on real time, based on conversation. That's why I think that schools tomorrow needs to really double down on getting people to have great communication skills, interpersonal skills, ability to connect, listening skills. Those core fundamentals that people always used to bullshit in their CVs will become more popular again because AI can code for you. Great, right? AI can do copywriting for you. Great. AI can write your book for you. But what can it not do? That's the conversation and that's the space that people need to be doubling down at. And that's the emotion, the connection, the power of being an individual and a human. Because for the most part, the big strategy around social and marketing going forward is all about the humanization of a brand. And people are not realizing that they're shooting themselves in the foot by building their whole strategy based on tech. It's counterproductive. Actually, yes, utilize the technology for mundane stuff. Like, for example, we use a note taker in the middle of meetings so we can be more present. And it takes all the notes for us and it classifies it down so that you know exactly and you don't miss anything, exactly who said what, etc., etc. Now, utilize that to enhance a human experience so you can be more present and connect. It works together. It's an and conversation, not an or conversation. And that's the same thing that I see with AI.
I love it. And I think you're right. I think it is true that we crave more for connection in this digital era. I mean, I agree with you. I think I've connected more in the last 12 months with people over digital platforms that I've ever connected in my whole life. And there must be a reason for it, right?
100%. Deeper connections are always important. Comment sections are great. Speaking through memes are great. But I feel like the people or the entrepreneurs of tomorrow or the faces of tomorrow of brands will be those that can connect with people in a deeper way. I think just having really great content or writing really funny captions, I just feel like that's really finite. I think that eventually, when everybody can do that, and it's no longer a point of difference, then you're going to have to find a new strategy. And I feel that that's deeper connections.
Okay, so let's go back to community building because I think we sort of left it a little bit behind this topic, and I'm really curious to hear what your steps are. So I have this new brand today, and I'm just starting out. I want to play the long game, and I want to start building my community. How do I go about it?
I think the best way to go about it is it's very, very difficult to build a community from scratch. First and foremost, you have to be a student of the industry that you're in. You have to understand it. You have to understand, okay, cool. Let's say this is a bike company. Just go randomly. Then it's like, okay, cool. What do I know about the products? What do I know about the industry? And what do I know about the people that are aficionados, advocates of that industry? And then I say, okay, cool. Who are the ones that are the most obsessed with it? There's different tiers to like utilization. There is the early adopters. Those are the real authentic. They know everything about it. It's all about credibility. They're the top of the tier. Then there's the almost like there's the early adopters, and then you go to the next phase, and those are the ones that are a little bit more passive, right? But they still galvanize based on whatever the cool kids are having. And then there's those that are the late bloomers, right? Now you say, okay, cool, of those three different options, who do we want to galvanize and who do we want to focus on? And then who do we need to be for them to recognize us as the key voice and the go-to market? So it always starts with the user, and it also starts with your industry. So it starts there before you even started with a strategy, because the strategy is just to resonate with that audience. It's a bat symbol to say, we understand you now, come over here. So your strategy is formally based on what do they value, what's important to them, and how do I almost like reinforce that in our content and in our strategy. And everything you're doing every day is to get them to say, yep, they get me, they understand me. That's the whole strategy. Like, for example, and I'll say this, there was a 6-month period when I didn't know what products were going out because I didn't need to, right? Because the strategy remains the same. How do you unite people? How do you unite the fitness community even better tomorrow than you did yesterday? And if you keep doing that, whatever the person or the people are wearing at the time that you do that is what people will like and associate back to unifying the fitness community, right? That's what it is. The strategy doesn't change. It's just how do you do that even better or even more different based on what's relevant today? And that's what I think is a sound strategy.
It's really funny that you gave the example with the bike company because that's one business that I would never be able to build. You know why? Because I cannot ride a bike.
Really?
To this day.
Can you swim?
I can, thankfully. But the riding the bike has never been my thing. It's fun in a way, but on the other side, I'm asking myself, would I need to know how to ride a bike in order to be credible? I guess so, right? Because otherwise, how are you part of that community? And this goes to the conversation we had before about how personal it becomes, right? You need to be part of that community.
Or now here's other how other communities can be. The absence or the inability to do something can also be in a community. The first reference point of communities was when Facebook was kicking off and people started to create these really weird meme pages that were based on things that everybody connected with, right? Like I saw one that said, I'm afraid of bananas. And there was like a million people saying, me too, me too, me too. You know me, I'm the same, right? Now, Oasis is probably the best example of that for people that don't like water. There's a community of people that don't like water, and Oasis said that we're for you, right? That's effectively what community is you identify that there's an insight of these people that exist that think this way. You created a product and a brand to satisfy those people, and because you've done your research, you've incorporated that into your marketing, and therefore they recognize that you know them authentically. So for example, you're better off starting a community of people that don't know how to ride bikes. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that don't. And then now, what do people that don't like riding bikes do? Is the objective to want to ride a bike? Or is it because they make fun of people that ride bikes? Now it's like, okay, cool. Which angle do we take? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, somehow the product needs to speak to that, right? So I'm launching this amazing bike for people that don't know how to ride the bike. So the product is probably it's the easiest bike that you can ever learn how to ride the bike on, right? And so I'm also thinking that must have to do with having a purpose, right? So if I think about this very specific, which it starts to become a very good business idea all of a sudden, by the way. I'm thinking is it has to do with purpose, right? You build a community around, a pain point, but also around the purpose. The purpose is we want to get everyone to learn to ride a bike. And this is the perfect product to do so with. How do you look at the purpose? I mean, I know that, it sounds all cliche to say you need to know your why, but I have to admit that I'm a strong believer in that. You have to have a reason for being out there. You have to have a purpose for, to serve the consumer in a certain way. And then consumers need to rally around you because they found that one thing that unites them. But I don't really think that you can build a community without having a very strong purpose. Can you?
No, you can't. And also, it helps even more if you build a business around a problem. Even better, an infinite problem, right? So the business that I'm launching soon called Butterfly Effect. Butterfly Effect in itself is the solution to a problem, right? We want to make the creative industry more diverse or make it easy for people from diverse backgrounds to access the industry. Now, how do you do that? So you need people to hire more people of color or people from different genders, sexual orientation, etc. You need people to want to take a chance on people. Now, if you take a zoom out and you map out the industry, how businesses and marketeers especially operate is they don't come up with something new, they copy, right? So if it works somewhere else, they want to do the same thing. So you're like, okay, cool. With that logic in mind, can you create a platform where marketeers and key decision makers for marketing teams, you have their attention and give that platform to diverse creators to showcase what they can do. And then once they see that work, that pulls people in and creates a butterfly effect, right? So in essence, the solution to the problem is the business, right? And because it's a problem and a big problem, it's an infinite one. And then because it's a positive one, based on something that we all agree is a challenge, people will gravitate and want to get involved in it, right? So for the most part, I do 100% feel like if the sole motivation, because at the end of the day, it's not an NGO or anything like that, and most businesses aren't, but for the most part, on one and on an emotional end, it can help you stand out, especially with modern day talent, because they want to feel a part of something that solves a bigger purpose. because that's the thing that makes all the hard hours, pushbacks, all worth it. But on a practical side, once you start to see success and your teams get to 10, 50, 100, 1,000, if you don't have a purpose, then it's chaos, right? Then people are making decisions left, right, and center on behalf of the brand, and no one really understands why we're doing it. That's why you need to have alignment meetings to make sure that we're all saying the same thing. But then, depending on who you speak to, you'll have a different iteration on who the brand actually is. That's why if you have a purpose from the start, and you make sure that everybody's onboarded with that purpose, it actually practically makes a lot of sense because you save time not being stuck in meetings, reinforcing what's in your head, right? So it's important to make sure that you have that in mind. You know why people are there. You know why you're building this brand, and you have your values in place. And those values should not just be something that you stuck on because people said, oh, we're innovative, we're diverse, whatever. That doesn't mean anything. It has to be things that you're willing to hire people on, fire people on, and use it as the objective metric when you're stuck between different decisions. That's how important they are. Because if you get that right, then 1,000 people can actually work independently because they know that when they come to a crossroad, let's look back at our values and we know what the decision is. And you don't have to be in every single meeting. That's just how I see it.
I completely agree. And butterfly effect. I love this name, and how perfect is it for a creative agency? How did you come up with that, and tell me a little bit about your purpose behind this?
For the most part, I don't know whether you know about Spotify Wrapped, right? But there's an artist called Travis Scott. He's my favorite in terms of like most listened to artist. At the top of my Spotify Wrapped for 3 years was a song called Butterfly Effect, right? And I love it. It's one of my favorite songs. I usually listen to it when I need a pickup. I'm in the gym. I need energy. Like I could be on my deathbed and that song will play and I will find a way to get out, right? So it kept popping up, but then I didn't know what it meant, right? And it was only when I understood the multiplier effect or the ripple effect, butterfly effect, that came from the chaos theory of doing one little thing at a time and then eventually it leads to chaos. I was like, that's effectively a system for anything in life, right? You're trying to get one person to like something, then 100 people to like something, then eventually 1 million people to like something. The issue is going back to that whole theory of people overestimate what they can achieve in a year, but underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years, right? Once you start to map out, okay, cool, here's what I want to be in 10 years. What do I need to be in year 9, 8, 7, 6, 5? And then you go back to year 1, you realize, oh, I actually don't have to do that much in year 1 to be in the right trajectory. So you focus on, okay, cool, now I know that if I do this, the future will look after itself, right? And that whole ethos is super important when it comes to building communities, when it comes to building brands, when it comes to driving revenue. It's just a very simple way for you to really understand how you get from point A to point B, which could be massive, but in very little steps every single day. And I just feel like going back to the whole ethos of the name, one, it was perfect. Two, our slogan is create chaos, so it makes a lot of sense. And we actually named it with a 3 instead of an E, right? Because when you put a B, capital B with a 3, it looks like a butterfly, right? Which is pretty cool. So wherever you see the logo, wherever you see your name, there's chaos. And that's what we want to do.
What's your purpose long term with it? Because I know from previous conversations that you want to have a bigger impact, right? This is what motivates you. This is what drives you. What is your bigger purpose in creating the butterfly effect?
That the creative industry is more reflective of the world that we live in, right? At the end of the day, you want to build a company that is no longer needed, right? That should be the thing that drives you. You should actually be having an end goal, even though an infinite one, that it's almost like you build a brand to serve a purpose and you know what happens when you've reached it is when the brand is no longer needed, right? So it probably will never happen, but I will go there one step every day, right? Is once the statistics for the amount of diverse people in teams on marketing at a global level starts to change, when the conversation around being a woman CEO or woman CMO starts becoming a moment of celebration, just a normalized thing, right? Once representation is normalized, then we've done what we needed to do, right? And then we can fade off in the background and it can no longer use that as a hook. If you can use that as a hook, it means that it's not actualized. So until us saying that is now well, for example, when you think about Gen Z and you talk about representation or you talk about equality, for them, it's just a normality. But for the old generation, you need to convince people that it's the right thing to do, right? So I feel, going back to the whole theory of not worrying about the big players, but think about the people that are coming up. That's where I focus a lot of my efforts, because I'm actually not trying to create the company that's responsible for that change. If we become the spark for the people that will do that, now that's brilliant, right? And I feel like everybody believes or thinks, because the world evolves around them and they're the only one that can do a thing. But actually, that's the whole thing about the butterfly effect. We're just the first butterfly. We need a few more to flap their wings for us to start a tornado, right? So that's why we put our blueprint up front. We tell people what we're trying to do. If it inspires other people to do the same, that's where we start going.
And it sounds super inspiring, and I cannot wait for you guys to launch it. When are you launching it?
14th of March,
Woohoo!
which is National Learn About a Butterfly Day in true poetic nature.
Amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So hopefully people start to mark that in their calendars going forward, because that's going to be a date that we want to take over.
Elfried, thank you so much for taking the time. It was such a pleasure to talk to you as always. I feel that I was not able to ask you all the questions and to touch on all of the subjects that I wanted to actually discuss with you. And almost I feel like there should be a part 2 at one point. I'm looking forward to that. But it's been a true pleasure always to speak to you and to hear from you, and all the best of luck with Butterfly Effect. I cannot wait to see it out there and to create that chaos.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. Like I said, I love conversations when you get to like the detail of things, because every time people jump on podcasts and you ask them, I remember there was a trend when people were saying, would you rather have a meal with Jay-Z or 50K, right? And then a little girl asked Jay-Z, what's your advice for something? And he said, believe in yourself. And I was like, well, I know what I'm going to do, right? It's like for the most part, a lot of people jump on platforms and they give you very surface level examples, right? And I always try my best when I can to almost give people something that's practical. And I think that that's what your platform does. It's all about practicality. We ask practical questions. And that's why I was excited to hop on. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Can't wait to speak to you soon. Thank you for tuning into Unmatched. Remember, building an unmatched brand is not just about success. It's not about popularity. It's about creating something truly remarkable that reflects who you are and what you stand for. So keep pushing yourself to go beyond what you think is possible. Keep taking risks, challenging yourself, and never settle for standard. And if you like what you hear, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest episodes. Until next time, keep being unmatched.